Welcome back. In part 2 of the Kraft Switcher, we'll introduce the different industries around Castlegar that we'll be switching today. We'll get our train organized, and we'll begin switching out the wood chip hoppers at the large Celgard mill west of town. In part 1 of the series, our train left Nelson and arrived at Castlegar, so let's examine the trackage around Castlegar. Castlegar is an important junction town where the Boundary Subdivision and the Roslyn Subdivision meet. It's also the junction of the Columbia River and the Kootenay River. As with every town on the Columbia and Western, east is to your left and west is to your right. This is because the prototype followed the major water features normally on the southern and eastern banks. So from a model point of view, we're always in the water features, looking south towards the railroad. The Boundary Subdivision enters here at the east end of town and passes behind the Celgard mill, exiting west on its way to Shields. The Roslyn Subdivision exits Castlegar here, heading south towards the large Cominco smelter at Trail and the associated fertilizer plant at Warfield. On the southern leg of the Y is Castlegar Yard, consisting of 2 double-ended tracks and a stub track. These tracks are very helpful for dropping cars, so they can be picked up by the east and westbound freights. It is important to keep the through track clear on the southern leg of the Y, because that track is used by the ore freights moving from the west end of the Boundary Subdivision onto the Roslyn Subdivision on their way to Trail. The largest industry that the Kraft Switcher switches is the Celgard Kraft Mill, hence the name of the switcher. We'll see a lot of that industry later on in these videos. In any given operating session, the Celgard mill may ship and receive about 20 cars. Inputs at Celgard that are received by rail include the wood chips from the various sawmills in the area, sulfuric acid from the Cominco smelter, and a variety of additives received by both tank car and covered hopper. The outbound loads from Celgard are exclusively baled pulp used in rayon, shipped in 40-foot boxcars that are loaded internal to the plant, and 50-foot boxcars that are loaded through side doors. The second largest industry is the Pope and Talbot sawmill. Its spurs are switched trailing point, which adds some variety. Although it's a large structure, it pales by comparison to the prototype, occupying perhaps less than 5% of the prototype's real estate. Located conveniently between these two industries is West Robson, comprising both a runaround track and a storage track. Both of these features are very handy in operations. Back at Castlegar proper, located in and around the Y, are the iconic station, a team track, a freight house, and an end loading ramp. Located in the station is the agent operator's office, and outside is the train order semaphore. Passing trains, including ourselves, will register here. We'll also receive orders, and we'll need orders to run extra back to Nelson in the afternoon. The semaphore is also set by the train order operator as trains pass through to protect the rear of the train for a 20-minute period. At the south end of town is the Mitchell Lumber Yard and the Canadian Propane dealership. In order to switch these last two industries, the Kraft operator will have to pass through the swing gate. To make it a little bit more convenient to switch on this side of town, there's a secondary control panel for controlling the switches here. Now that you've had an overview, let's get to the Kraft job. That's the Celgard Kraft pulp mill off in the distance. It looks like loaded wood chip hoppers and some log bunks have been left in the tracks of West Robson. More often these cars are left in the yard, but having them start here is actually pretty convenient. The Pope and Talbot sawmill is in the foreground. There's its slash burner, freight house and team track and station, and the junction between the Boundary and the Roslyn sub. Here's our train arriving. We're going to stop just short of the lead switch so that our head end brakeman can jump down and set the switch for the passing siding. The lights are on in the train order office, and there's a CP transport truck pulled up to the freight house behind it. Our first step is going to be to split our train. We're going to put the loaded wood chip hoppers and the log bunk on the west end of the siding just after the crossover. The next step will be to put the empty boxcars for the Celgard pulp and the additive cars, also for Celgar, into Castlegar yard. What will be left on the east end of the siding will be the caboose and the cars for the balance of Castlegar. In order to break the train, we need to create a little bit of slack. A couple of honks on the horn indicates that the whole train is backing up to create the slack. All of the Kraft job operates within yard limits. In fact, the crew of the Kraft job act as yardmasters for Castlegar while they're there. We use this to great advantage. Because there are no Class 1 trains on the schedule, every train approaching Castlegar must approach yard limits at restricted speed prepared to stop, and negotiate with the Kraft job their entrance and passage through Castlegar. This means that we can occupy the main unrestricted while we're there. The Castlegar yard limits exist on the east end of the Slocan Bridge, on the west end behind the Celgard Kraft pulp mill, and on the south end at the switch leading down to the helix that is the Roslyn subdivision. You'll note that we're going to be occupying the passing siding for pretty much the whole time we're at Castlegar today. This will make it awkward, but not impossible, for the dispatcher to organize a meet between two other trains. Should the dispatcher want to organize a meet, they can do so using the two legs of the Y. If it's important that both the passing siding and the main be available for the meet, we can either pull our train onto the Roslyn subdivision, or we can pull it towards Kraft and hang out at West Robson until the meet's complete. As you can see, we've pulled the whole train into the West Robson branch and are now backing up through that really convenient crossover and into Castlegar yard, where we'll drop the additive cars and then the empty box cars. We'll retrieve them later. There is a box car already present in the yard. This is an off spot from the last job. That will need to go to the freight house before we're finished. Our next step is to go get those loaded wood chip hoppers and that log bunk. We'll add our log bunk to the two that are already sitting off spot in the storage track at West Robson. Then we're going to use our loaded wood chip hoppers as kind of a handle to go in and reach the empty hoppers that are sitting in the wood chip tracks in the mill. We're about to meet the first train of the day coming through. It's extra 4236, which is the hotshot northbound from the Castlegar smelter and the Warfield fertilizer plant. It's going to drop off a few cars in the yard. It's got a couple of acid tanks for us. Those are going to end up going to the Celgard mill. As well, it has some CN phosphate cars that are going to make their way westbound to the port of Vancouver. (4236) is going to pull into the yard and drop these cars for us, as well as for number 81, which is the westbound boundary freight. It'll then back its train back onto the Roslyn subdivision and head onto the eastbound leg of the Y, stopping at the register station to get its orders to be able to enter the boundary subdivision and make its way to Nelson. Now on the prototype, of course, you would have left a whole train on the Roslyn sub instead of making the backup move. But on the Columbia and Western, the Roslyn sub is a helix, and leaving an unattended train on the helix is not a wise idea, so the train is pulled all the way into the yard and then backed up. The motive power on 4236 includes a high horsepower but aged Fairbanks Morse Trainmaster. It's seen a lot of years around the Castlegar smelter in Cadnac, which is why it's so beaten up. Those two acid tanks are for us, the Kraft Switcher, to be taken to Celgard. Those three covered hoppers are for number 81. It will pick those up as well as the empty wood chip hoppers as it comes through later in the day. In this view, we can see the advantage of the car-top waybills that indicate where the cars have to go. The yard is on 13-foot centers, and it's inconveniently located about 3 feet from the aisleway, making it nearly impossible to determine from car numbers which cars have to be routed where. So we've elected to use the car tags rather than a conventional car. It was for reasons such as this that I elected to use car tags rather than a more conventional car card or switch list arrangement. Yes, they're very visible in videos like this, and in practice during operating sessions, I find the operators tend to ignore them and focus on the ease and convenience they provide rather than the visual distraction. Like all extras on the Columbia and Western, Extra 4236 is carrying white flags. These flags are slipped into stanchions at the beginning of the session, and serve the same purpose as they do on the prototype, making it easy for crew to identify approaching trains and indicating whether they're extras or scheduled trains. Extra 4236 is pulling to a stop near the station. It will go in and sign the register and wait for orders, allowing it to proceed onto the boundary sub. And 4236 is on its way. It passes underneath the highway overpass on the outside of town and immediately begins to cross the Slocan River Bridge. The hotshot is a pretty long train, often 20 to 30 cars in length of 60-foot covered hoppers. There's some empty ore ginnies, going back for lead concentrate, and at the tail end we have the shorty caboose. 2 of these were made, specifically for the Tiger switchbacks. One is often used as a switching platform in the Nelson yard. Let's return back to the switcher. That little 44-tonner actually isn't used during operating session. It's intended to represent the power that the Celgard crew uses to position the loaded wood chip hoppers for end unloading by a front-end loader into a grizzly. That horn indicates extra 4080 is on its way, appearing off the boundary subdivision into Celgard, perhaps a little fast for restricted speed in a yard limit. 4080 is hauling 27 loads of copper ore. The ore was mined on the Phoenix branch, which is to the west of Grand Fork, and taken downhill through Grand Forks to Cascade, which is the western foot of Heron Hill. Pushers, which are located on Heron Summit, drop down the hill and have helped push 4080 up to the summit. .4080's crew has lined the switches off the boundary subdivision and onto the through track through Castlegar yard and onto the Roslyn stub. The crew is going to slow their train and stop to register at the Castlegar station before proceeding to Cadnac. And 4080's on its way. While all that excitement through Castlegar has been going on, the switcher's been at the Kraft pulp mill, exchanging empty wood chip hoppers for loads. Those empty hoppers are bound for a variety of different mills. The orange-tagged ones are westbound. They'll be picked up at number 81 and taken to mills at Grand Forks and Midway. Gray-tagged ones are for us. We'll take those and drop those at South Slocan, where the Slocan Wave Freight will take them up to the Triangle Forest Products Mill tomorrow morning. Any white ones are bound back for Nelson and the Kootenai Forest Products sawmill that's there. In addition to the 55-foot wood chip hoppers, there's also some 60-foot Gunderson cars. These 60-foot Gundersons have come either from the south off the Burlington Northern or from the east, likely from the Spookton Cup Mill. We're going to haul those empty chip hoppers across the crossover and into Castlegar Yard, picking up the box cars for Celgar as we go. Returning from the yard with the empty boxcars tacked on the tailing end of our unit, we'll now proceed to push the loaded wood chip hoppers onto the chip track. It's important to switch the chip tracks out early. We want to get the orange tagged empty chip hoppers into Castlegar yard before the 9:30 scheduled visit of number 81, which will take them to the Midway and Grand Forks mills. With the chip tracks drilled, we'll now move on to pulling the loaded boxcars of baled pulp from inside the mill, and that will make room for those empty boxcars we brought from the yard.